Scared and confused teachers in some Florida counties are scrambling to comply with a new law championed by Governor Ron DeSantis. They're removing or physically covering the books in their classes because the law now requires classroom libraries be approved by a trained media specialist. Violations could be charged as a third-degree felony. Layla Santiago is live for us in Miami this morning. Layla, what in the world is going on here?
All right, so Don, this is related to a law that actually took effect in July of last year, but as recently as just a few weeks ago, the Florida Department of Education was still putting out guidance. And you know, as I've been watching these school board meetings, you hear from parents that will tell you this is about transparency. This is about parents' rights. But I've also talked to parents and teachers that are using some of those words you just used, Don. They're saying that they're describing this as angst, fear, and confusion.
Behind the covered wall of paper in this Manatee County classroom, books. Teacher Don Falls told us he covered the bookshelves out of concern for a new state law that requires all books in classroom libraries to be approved or vetted by a media specialist or librarian that is trained by the state.
Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Unereased Black Women Speaks. She wrote the book. I am super excited to be with you for this special conversation with an outstanding, powerful woman who is an author, an attorney, an activist, and also an academic, Nkechi Taifa. She is the author of the best-selling memoir, Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice, which came out a couple of years ago, as well as 3 bestseller books for young people, Shining Legacy, Story of Poems for the Young, So Black Heroes, and Heroines Forever Will Be Sung. I love that, which has been published twice. We'll get into reason why here in a little bit. Also, The Adventures of Kojo and Amma, and 3 Tales for Wisdom. She also co-authored Reparations Yes with attorney Chokwe Lumumba and Dr. Imari Obadeli. Her newest book is already a bestseller, Reparations on Fire, How and Why It's Spreading Across America, which was published in December of last year. So welcome to the space, Nkechi.
I'm so glad to be with you, Marcy. How are you today?
I am doing great. And I just am really enthralled with your life, your story. I had a chance to watch the TED Talk that you did a couple of years ago or a year or so ago. So I'm really anxious to get into it and talk to you about your work and specifically as it pertains to the books that you have written.
All right, well, let's get rocking and rolling.
Yeah, let's get into it. So, as I mentioned earlier, you have written 3 children's books, and during the summer of 2021, 2 of those books were actually banned. Tell us a little bit about those books and why you feel that they wound up being banned.
All right, so let me just go back a bit, if I may, because
Sure.
Those books weren't just written. They really were written in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yes.
Before I became a lawyer. And they were books that taught history and taught issues dealing with Black people from our frame of reference. At that time, I was a teacher in an independent Black school, and we produced a lot of our own material. So those books were written at that time. So when I found out that they were on the banned book list of the Central York School District, Central York, Pennsylvania School District, my jaw dropped. First of all, it dropped because the books had been out of print for years.
Right. How they even find them.
And then my jaw dropped because this is a book talking about our history. Mm-hmm. Why is it that our history needs to be banned from schools? So I decided if they're going to ban my children's books from way back in the day, then I'm going to go on and put them back out in print so that a new generation can, can love and appreciate them as well. So that is what I did. I had my books reprinted, And they are on the bestseller list of AALBC, which is the African American Literary Book Club. And they also won the bestseller of Amazon during their first weekend of being published, of being republished.
Well, I applaud you. So I applaud you for doing that, because we know that the whole issue of book banning is happening a lot. And I just find, I'm like you, my mind is blown. Like, who even knew, who would go back for something that had been written, 30 years prior to decide to ban it? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. So the book talked about heroes and heroines from the past, such as Denmark Vesey and Harriet Tubman and Fannie Lou Hamer and Joseph St. Q and Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey and Harriet Tubman. And the list goes on. There's 12 Black heroes and heroines, particularly during that time, 30 years ago. Many of the people that are highlighted in the book were not ones that many people knew about at the time. This was before the movie Amistad came out. This was before the movie about Harriet Tubman came out, though most folk knew about Harriet Tubman. I have a story poem on, of course, Rosa Parks as well. But by and large, it was those who didn't quite make the front pages. During Black History Month back then in the day, there was Frederick Douglass, there was Martin Luther King, but you didn't hear about Toussaint Louverture, who was in that book as well. You know what I'm saying? So I sought to highlight some of those heroes and heroines in the past that didn't quite always make it into the front pages. I don't know whether that's the reason why the books were banned. And within that book also, there were 3 short stories.
Okay.
One was called Ayana, which is an Afrocentric take on the Cinderella story, shall we say. Another one was called it was about Marcus Garvey, how a young boy growing up in Harlem learns the story of the mighty Marcus Garvey. And and another one was dealing with African proverbs and how wisdom was learned through encounters with spiders or animals or whatever different things that were part of proverbs. And those were originally those 3 stories were originally part of my Shining Legacy Black Hero and Hero. So that's why I say, so that is what was banned. And when I republished it, I republished them as 2 separate books. One was the story points with the heroes and heroines, and then the other one with the what I call 3 tales of wisdom. And just to give just a little flavor, I call them story poems because they were stories about our history, but they were in verse. And this was long before rap. I'm telling you, this was like over 30 years ago. But I'm just going to do from memory, maybe just a tidbit from 1 or 2 of them. Let's try. Listen to the legend. Wait, I'm trying to remember my brain. I'm doing this totally from memory. Let's try Rosa Parks. Sister Rosa Parks, strong and bold, standing by the bus stop, tired and cold. Along comes the bus with its Jim Crow laws, which seems like a prison with invisible bars. Well, Miss Parks got on that bus and went straight to the back where the Alabama law said was a place for blacks. Looking in the back, she didn't see no seats, so she sat down near the front. She was, and actually the story poem changed also. Because 30 years ago, the theme that was out there was Rosa Parks was what? She was tired.
Right.
She sat down there, but that is not what the situation really was. She wasn't tired. She was an activist. She was a fighter. She was part of the civil rights movement. And there's a recent documentary out that was part of a book called The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks.
I'm familiar with it.
The story became more understandable, in the public media, my story poem changed as well. So instead of saying she had poor tired feet, it changed to something different. So why would something like that be banned?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, some of the people that were covered in the book, I kind of understand why it probably happened. Because because a lot of those people, they were activists, they were very strong, they were very vocal about things, and those are the exact types of things that folks don't want us to know about.
That is a part of history.
Oh, I know that. You know that. But there are people who don't want, others to know that. But once again, I applaud you for, deciding that this is important enough to go ahead and make sure that these stories get back out there and that these stories are told. But, just thinking about the fact that it happened 30 years ago, it just really makes me wonder, like, who is going and digging quite that deep to look for things that weren't even out in the atmosphere at the time that they decided to ban them.
Yeah. And so which really made me know that they really hadn't even read the book when they did say they just saw the title. And the title was part of a curriculum, a supplemental curriculum that the school committee wanted as supplemental material. Some of my books were part of that curriculum. So they hadn't even read it because it had not even been in print in years. We're talking about more than 30 years. I'm talking about late 70s, early 80s.
Right. Well, once again, kudos to you for going ahead and putting them back out there, and they're available for people who want to read the stories and to understand what it is that you're sharing with the children. And for some of us as adults, I'm sure we're going to learn something from them as well. So as you have written several books, I also want to talk about your Black Lawyer, which came out a couple of years ago, My Audacious Quest for Justice. So what was it that prompted you to actually write a memoir to tell your story?
Yes, well, I sat at the feet of giants, shall I say, the ancestors now, and many of the names you don't even know because they've kind of been swept from history's pages. But I learned a lot from them, and many of them didn't leave a record of things that they were about and the movements that they were a part of. But I learned from them, and I said, I want to make sure that I share some of those stories from what I learned and put out my memoir so that people don't have to search and grope around. Marcy, there's a lot of talk about reparations now today. And one of my mentors was Queen Mother Audley Moore. Again, a name that most folk do not know, although there is a biography coming out on her next year written by a historian, an academician, Ashley Farmer, dealing with Queen Mother Moore. But she influenced just about every single reparations movement in the 20th century. She was a part of the Garvey movement back in the 1920s. Yeah, we're talking about someone who was active her whole life until she passed at the age of 97. She influenced Martin Luther King. She influenced Nelson Mandela. She influenced the Black Panther Party. She influenced the Republic of New Africa, Nation of Islam. The list goes on and on. And I learned a lot from her. I learned a lot from Imari Abubakari Obadeli. And again, these were movements, that most folk would consider on the fringe of society, what we call the Black radical tradition, from which Black Lives Matter, all of this movement of young people that were coming up now. Well, the first BLM was the Black Liberation Movement, and now it's Black Lives Matter. But these are some of the roots of that. I came up with the making sure Black studies will be in the schools. Now they're taking Black studies out of the schools.
Yes.
In the 70s, our fight was for Black studies to come into the school. I came up with the anti-apartheid movement and lobbying against apartheid in South Africa. The movement to free political prisoners. I mean, there's a lot of people who are in prison now, some of whom are just coming out, very elderly men and women who were caught up in the 70s and early 80s as part of the FBI secret illegal program to disrupt and destroy movements that was called the COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program. And so I came up as part of those movements. I came up as part of what we call the independent Black schools movement. And as I said, I used to be a teacher in an independent Black school, which was like a take off of the freedom schools from the civil
Right.
rights,
Right.
era. So all of that is part of my book, my memoir, Black Power, Black Lawyer. And the first whole part of the book really is that Black radical
Yes.
tradition, okay, of which I learned from and was part of. And the second part is me being a Black lawyer, and I'm still a Black radical, but I'm a lawyer. I'm part of the system, shall we say?
Okay.
But it's talking about maneuvering those different parts of my life. But it's a very authentic book because there's a lot of personal stuff in there as well. Failed relationships,
Yes. Yes, we have them.
as women, that we go through and things along those lines. So I call it my audacious quest for justice because it's not for the meek-minded. It is an audacious book. I represented as a lawyer people that society would have just wished would have gone, away. I did this just been a lot as part of my career, I guess you could say, and it's all in that book, Black Power, Black Lawyer, my audacious quest.
That really sounds exciting. A lot to share. You have a life that you've seen a lot, experienced a lot, learned a lot just throughout your life, sat at the feet of giants, so we really look forward to diving into that for those who haven't had an opportunity to do so. But you did mention reparations. Now, I know that one of your first books was one that talked about reparations that you also have kind of rewritten or included in the newest book, Reparations. No, actually, yeah, Reparations on Fire.
Is the new
yes,
one.
you can fix that, April. Reparations on Fire is the new book that just came out.
And the reason why I wanted to really get that book out because my original book on reparations, which I co-authored with Imari Obadeli and Chokwe Lumumba, you might know the name Chokwe Lumumba because that's the name of the current mayor of Jackson, Mississippi. But I'm talking about his daddy. I co-wrote the book with his daddy, who was a mayor of Jackson before his son became a mayor. And that book was written in 1987. Well, that book was also part of the banned book list of the Central York, Pennsylvania School District.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that 1987 book had not been in print in decades. In fact, I did a search and I was on Amazon and somebody was selling their individual copy for like $800. I said, wait a minute, it's time for me to go in and just put the book out at a reasonable cost of price. And what I did was Reparations on Fire tells about this current movement for reparations, how it's just popping all over the country, from the federal government, from states to local city jurisdictions, municipalities. But in the appendix of that book, I reprinted the 1987 book that I co-wrote that was called Reparations, Yes, which was the book that was banned by the Central York School District. So Reparations on Fire is the current what's going on that I wrote, but I included as an appendix the book from the past.
Yes, and one of the things in watching your TED Talk, you really went through like your whole journey of even understanding what reparations were, why they were important, and all of that. So through your book, as well as through your work, you are actively involved in some of the initiatives that are working towards getting reparations. Is there anything new or what's currently going on in that front, in light of the fact that, at least at the time of this recording, we're coming up on Juneteenth. So people are thinking about our freedom and reparations and things of that nature.
So yes, in fact, I know this is a recording, but today I just came from testifying before the DC City Council in support of a bill that was just introduced by Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie to establish a reparations task force here in Washington, D.C. There were over 100 witnesses, and the hearing went on past 5 o'clock. You know what I'm saying? And I testified there. But the interesting thing about it, and this is part of my life, I said in my testimony that this was not the first time I testified before the DC City Council on reparations. Because 33 years ago, there was a bill introduced in the DC City Council that myself, as part of, I was chair of the DC chapter of the National Conference of Black Lawyers at the time, encouraged the DC Council to pass a resolution supporting the federal bill that had just been introduced in Congress by Congressman John Conyers, and they did unanimously. But that, again, was only a bill saying DC urges you, Congress, to pass H.R. 40, the bill that Congressman John Conyers introduced. What the bill today is doing is actually calling for a task force in D.C. to look in our own backyard here and look at the abuses and look at the living legacies from the enslavement era and come up with amends. Now, Marcy, many people don't realize that reparations were in fact paid at the end of the Civil War. They just weren't paid to Black people. Right. They were paid to the former white slave owners to compensate them for the loss of their property, which was us. I didn't grow up learning about that.
Right. And when I was listening to your TED talk, I'm like, wow, that's something we don't realize that. And, I knew about the situation, for example, with Haiti having to pay money to France because they were free, they received their freedom or their independence, but I wasn't aware of some of those other stories. So it's just powerful for us to know and to be aware. So you have boots on the ground, you're really involved in a lot of the movements. What kinds of things can the rest of us do to get involved and be aware of what's going on, or how can we lend our voice to some of the initiatives that are happening around the country?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I like Unereased Black Women Speak, okay? Because you all put the information out there about what is happening. One of the things I said during my testimony today is that with respect to reparations, if people really show that this is what we want reparations. I mean, as you said, Juneteenth is right around the corner. Juneteenth, when the most furthest southern part of the United States finally found out from General Granger, Union troops, that they were free, or at least their freedom had been recognized 2 years earlier with the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, but they didn't find out until 2 years later. So we're coming up on that celebration. I was at the White House yesterday at the invitation of President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris for their first Juneteenth celebration at the White House, because again, the national holiday was just pronounced in 2021. And President Biden spoke about many things. He spoke about things that he had accomplished, such as the signing of the anti-lynching hate crimes bill, such as the airing of the documentary Till, about Emmett Till, in the White House, and of course, the signing of the bill making Juneteenth the second national holiday after Dr. Martin Luther King. But I'm listening really hard because I really wanted him to say that he would, with the stroke of his pen, sign an executive order bringing H.R. 40, which is the federal reparations bill, into existence. And I didn't hear it. And I didn't hear it probably because it has not reached him sufficiently enough that this is what Black people want. What I was saying in my testimony is that we need to show our love for reparations like we showed our love for Black Lives Matter after the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We need reparations now, signs in the front yards. Okay, we need people talking about it anywhere and everywhere that they go. I happen to live in Chevy Chase, DC, and I want to apologize for the darkness of my screen right now. My house is in the process of being renovated and the lights aren't the way they should be right now. But one of the things I said in my testimony today is that I'm in my neighborhood of Chevy Chase, DC, which is what we call in Washington west of the park. Okay, a pretty nice neighborhood. But I did not know that this whole area used to be Black owned back in the day. I'm talking about back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There were Black landowners here in this area. They were pushed out by design to be able to build a white enclave. This is what they wanted, a white enclave with a white school, Lafayette Elementary School. My daughter went to school, a playground, Lafayette, a playground. And the Black people were pushed out. And this was something that was systematic all over the country and all over DC, in Georgetown in DC, and Southwest DC. And we're testifying at this reparations hearing on issues in our own backyard in Washington, D.C. And I'm living in this area, and I did not know this history until a couple of years ago. Something is wrong with that picture. We don't need to be taking history out of the schools. History needs to be poured into the schools.
Absolutely.
You know? So,
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with that. Now, I noticed that actually just a few days ago in the state of Illinois, there was a bill signed about banning the book bans. But as I looked closely, it really was about banning book bans in public libraries. It still doesn't ban the book bans in schools and things of that nature. So what are your thoughts on just the whole thing with book banning, and even in that vein as well, things that we can do to try to prevent that or speak up and out about our stories, our history, our things being taken away from public consumption, basically?
Yes, well, we definitely need to keep the drumbeat going and keep it drumming loudly. Okay, we should not allow white supremacist ideology to win the day. I mean, you know, we have issues with voting rights being slashed. We have all these issues going on. And then on top of that, this whole onslaught against critical race theory, which is something that's on the law school level. And that's
not children.
Even if it was on the lower level. I mean, I'm just saying, we need true history, because Black history is American history as well, and it does not need to be whitewashed. I have a little sticker on my door that says "I read banned books."
Yeah,
I mean, I'm just saying. I would say this: when my books were republished after they were banned, it was. I think that's why they soared to the bestseller list, because people was wondering, well, why do they want to ban this book? You know, why are they banning these books that are teaching, you know, true history? So more and more people are flocking to them. So I'm hoping that is what happens. I hope that is what people do, and not just books. There needs to be depictions of true history all throughout the media, multimedia, and the like.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. And for us as readers, I think the important thing for us to do is, number one, to support Black authors and authors who are telling the stories of our history, or even if it's current day, because there are things that are current day that are getting banned as well. But as we find out who those writers are, what those stories are, that we go and support those books, because it's not necessarily that they aren't being sold. It's just they are being taken out of certain spaces. So I think it's important for us to support those who are falling onto those lists, number one, and as much as possible. And I know it's hard for some of us because we're used to our fast deliveries. Yeah. But as much as possible to be able to support Black-owned bookstores. You know, if you don't get it directly from the author themselves, go to a Black-owned bookstore, whether it's online or in person, to be able to. That's another way to keep those dollars in our community and circulate, the Black wealth and all of that in that way as well.
Absolutely. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
So yeah, I think was there anything that I didn't ask you, since it's going to get edited? Was there anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to share?
it's just getting darker and darker.
Yes, ma'am, it is. I'm sure they can probably fix that a little bit, do a little
Oh, God,
bit.
dang.
So,
Let me see. I don't know. I think you kind of went pretty comprehensive.
there is something I can ask you that I
Yeah.
didn't ask. Are there any books besides yours on the banned book list that you would recommend that we read by
Oh,
Black authors?
I recommend you read anything that shows up on a banned book list. I mean, we have the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah Jones on the banned book list. They have all these books by Ibrahim Kendi on the banned book list. I mean, give me a break. They have a book on Adinkra symbols, African Adinkra symbols that are banned. They have coloring books that are banned. So again, my motto to everybody is, whatever, you scour through those banned book lists and pick your fancy, because all of it is good.
All right.
They banned just about all of Toni Morrison's books.
Yes.
I mean, it's kind of mind blowing, and it's mind blowing because I came up in the era where there weren't any Black books at all. The reason why I wrote some of my children's books, because all we had back then in the day was the White Dick and Jane and Spot the Dog. That's what we had.
Very true.
So I wrote a book called The Adventures of Kojo and Amma, and they had the black cat Sheba, who brings good luck. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But, so all of those books, or any of those books, are books that our people should just flock to.
All right. Well, thank you, ma'am.
Black women's voices are often muted or erased. Our solution? Unereased Black Women Speak. We are a public engagement initiative committed to shaping narrative and creating content that amplifies Black women's voices and their civic activism.
We partner with Black women to be seen, heard, and felt in the public square. Hear us speak. We support Black women organizing for nonpartisan electoral power by providing space for public conversation, from spotlights and storytelling to our sister civic circle.
We share the achievements and actions of Black women who consistently impact culture, community, and our daily lives. We bring talent, tools, and strategic comms vision to civic engagement.
You can tune in to our monthly live shows focused on issues Black women care about. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel for video and voices capturing our stories and interests.
Check out our directory, celebrating Black women achievers and change agents. Visit UnereasedBWS.com, a hub for tools, events, storytelling, the Unereased Black Women Speak podcast, and our newsletter. Black women are a powerful force for challenge and change. We won't be erased.
See, hear, and feel us speak.